Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
We go to New York now, one of our Odyssey sister stations, WFAN in New York. We find Shaun Morash, although Morash, you're actually not working. So thank you for some time live from your hammock on vacation to share your New York Giants rantings. Although maybe you should be thanking me because, or maybe your wife should be thanking me because we know you're just going to rant about whatever Joe Schoen does on Hard Knocks anyway.
Yes, exactly. And you typical Washington fan. It's Joe Schoen. Get his name right. Have some respect.
Oh, yeah, that you know what? That's my bad. Joe Schoen, that's correct. Even though it's spelled like Schoen, it is pronounced Shane. So
I know.
My bad.
I wasn't going to let a commander station here call out Joe Schoen without his name right.
No, that's your job. So what'd you think of the first episode?
I will say this. I think it was really good TV. I'm really, really looking forward to the next couple episodes as well. I've talked to some people that have seen, I think, them all, if not everyone except the last one, and they said basically the best is yet to come. Here's the reason I think it's good. I think I'd be really interested and intrigued to watch going forward if this wasn't about a team that I get paid to talk about and a team that I grew up loving. So I think that NFL Films and Max, HBO, I think they've done a really good job here in trying to find a way to, of course, be pigs and expand, NFL talk and NFL revenue. That goes without saying. But everybody's gotten tired of the training camp version of Hard Knocks. I think this is really cool because I like the nerdy stuff about how a team is built from the end of the season on. And I think already in episode one, despite the fact that the Giants, like all these other teams, have editorial control, I think we got a lot of really cool moments and a lot of really cool conversations that, like we know, Craig, all of us in sports radio can only talk about when moves have happened in the offseason. But seeing the dynamic between Shane, his owner, John Mara, some of his, scouts and assistant personnel under him, kind of talking about the Saquon Barkley stuff. I think this has all been really intriguing so far.
No, I totally agree with you from just like a purely television element, because I think those of us that have covered the league too, you hear about names and assistant GM, watch out for this guy, or you hear about how a certain relationship maybe impacts a transaction. And we see it with the Brian Burns trade. We see that the relationship between the guys in Carolina and Shane and his group in New York winds up mattering. The thing that I come away from the first episode with, though, Shaun, is the seeming disconnect between Shane, the rest of his staff, and certainly what we ultimately know, because we're months ahead of where the episodes are, as the Eagles, and the value of Saquon Barkley. What did you make of the conversations between the Giants front office as they decided whether or not to re-sign their star running back, who we know ultimately signs with Philly?
Okay, so I think that this was, to me, the most concerning. I was going to say discerning. Concerning part of this whole thing, because a fear up here, Craig, in the New York area is that, does Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll truly have the flexibility to run a team they want to run? Because a lot of people don't give John Mara like that Jerry Jones treatment the way he should, but he's only really hired from within. Joe Schoen and Daboll was so far out of left field compared to what the Giants usually did in hiring circles. And you could tell John Mara loved Saquon Barkley, and the old guard that stuck around on his staff, including Tim McDonald, who's been around a while. Those guys love Saquon Barkley. And I think it was very clear from this episode, and of course where we got the end result, that ultimately Joe Schoen got to do the job he wanted, which was to let Saquon walk. But I mean, how clear do we need to see that the general manager does not value paying running backs high-end money? Some of his, close people with him believe that too, but the old guard loves the idea of, well, this is a franchise player. What's our identity going to be? And I almost wanted to throw the remote through the TV if I heard that one more time. What's the identity going to be? They scored 16 points per game with Saquon Barkley. If you get worse, you get worse. But I think we could trust that the GM understands that maybe building around the running back is the wrong plan. So I think that's obviously the most fascinating storyline from episode one. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Joe Schoen ultimately wins this war that we know he does win. But it is wild to see a front office that's split. And basically the split, if you pay close enough attention like we do up here, is guys who have been here pre-Shane versus the guys that Shane brought along. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. Shaun Morash, of course, producer of the afternoon show, WFAN in New York, also hosts weekends and does all kinds of great stuff covering the Giants up there with us here on the Hoffman Show. That's so interesting because I think when you watch it, if you don't have that background, you're almost like, man, Shane looks kind of like an idiot here because you just have people questioning him constantly. But I think that perspective of who is questioning him and why he holds fast in the way he does, and the background that isn't necessarily as given of like, well, what were they with Saquon Barkley is really fascinating. Is there any more of those kind of personnel dynamics as you watch the episode that really stick out to you as someone who knows and has a better bio and background on the players involved here?
Yeah, I think that it's very clear to me. Joe Schoen, I mean, I know this. John Mara's sons, by the way, are friends with Daniel Jones, so that's part of this too. I think that Daniel Jones, Saquon, what Dave Gettleman and the previous regime put together, I think that Joe Schoen was hired. They did not pick up Daniel Jones's option. They didn't give Saquon an extension right away, and they played out that year 2 years ago, which ultimately led to a playoff season. I think, to me, they took the job thinking, look, John, I know you love these guys. Look, we're going to build our own thing here. And then when they made the playoffs, it was almost like they punished themselves because it was able to have John Mara jump in and go, see, we need to make sure we franchise Saquon. We cannot lose him. Give Daniel Jones a contract. Look, see, Dave Gettleman was right all along. And I feel like Joe Schoen and to a lesser extent Brian Dable got very handcuffed by their playoff year. And I think that you could already tell that in this episode. Joe Schoen talks about last year's Saquon negotiations, taking a year off his life. Well, yeah, that's probably because he still didn't value him at the money he wanted. Saquon, as he put in quotes, would feel disrespected at low offers. And you have the owner breathing down his neck, telling him how much they need to keep him. So I just think all of that became clear. And I think that when you think of the Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley Giants, that is something that ownership wanted. They felt like they were proven right in the first year when Dable was the coach that coached these guys to the playoffs. And I think until Daniel Jones, who will probably be gone after this year, is off the team, and now that Saquon's off the team, Joe Schoen truly can't even fully run the operation the way he designed it or the way he thought it would be.
Yeah, I think the Jones conversation, to hear an NFL GM say out loud, like, we're paying this guy a lot of money, we need to figure out if he's worth it.
Right.
It's
that's the line of the show. We're not paying him $40 million to hand off to a $12 million running back. Now, Howie Roseman may disagree. But, yeah, I think that's almost like a shot at Mara. Hey, that's the way I read it, too, and maybe many didn't. Hey, remember when you wanted me to give Daniel Jones that $40 million? Well, guess what? Now we're not giving Saquon that $12 million. If you want to pay him $40 million, let's go see improvement here, John.
Right, totally. And I'm curious how, because I'm sure you guys on the show and on the shows up there over the course of the last week have taken calls on that. I'm curious how the fan base reacted to that as well, of kind of this almost ultimatum from the GM delivered via Hard Knocks to the quarterback of like, hey, dude, you better earn your money. Otherwise, we're gonna move on and find something else, considering it's been a bunch of rough years for the Giants outside of the playoff, surprise a couple of years ago. Is that a tolerance that fans have, or are they like, hell no, like you better figure out a way to win with what we got. And we don't want to see another year of Daniel Jones failing.
This is fascinating, Craig, because in many ways the episode and the dynamic we're talking about between ownership and the old guard versus the newest general manager is a lot like the fan base up here, because the fan base is extremely split, where I would say the older fan trusts and believes, hey, just get a good offensive line, which to a point they're probably right, but I think that ship sailed. And Daniel Jones and Saquon can operate. How are you going to run the ball without Saquon? And the younger Giant fan is like, enough is enough. I mean, we're watching all this run and gun, fun spread offenses in the NFL, and we are so archaic. So I think the vocal young fan watched this episode and I think almost negatively reacted to Joe Schoen when Joe Schoen said some positive things about Daniel Jones. Well, what's he supposed to say? The guy's the quarterback. He's on camera and everything. And I think freaked out that the Giants are going to be stuck here for the next couple of years and didn't pay close enough attention, where I think the old fan heard some of this stuff and was like, see, everybody believes in Daniel Jones. So it's kind of weird. I think we have a very split fan base up here, but I think ultimately all it took me was 45 minutes to feel trust in Joe Schoen and understand why when, he let Saquon walk, it's because he knows that, the team has too many holes to be paying a running back and not doing the running back by committee thing. And when it comes to quarterback, yeah, he's paying Daniel Jones, $40 million on average. But guess what? He also gave him essentially a 2-year deal. The Giants could get out of it this year, probably for that reason, thinking Daniel Jones, wouldn't be able to continue to succeed even with the offensive line they had. So the Giants have a lot of problems, no doubt about it. They also have a lot more solutions than people think, no doubt about it. But the fan base is as split as the regime seemed to be in episode 1.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Shaun Morash is our guest here from WFAN in New York. The idea that they have a ton of problems, but maybe more solutions than people realize. Because I'm sure you, like me, have been listening to a lot of these ranking episodes or reading articles, whatever, where, people that I like and respect are talking about our teams. And you're like, damn, y'all think we're going to be that bad?
Right.
And I think for Washington, obviously, you don't have a whole lot of ground to stand on. You won 4 games last year. A lot of people are not as high on Dan Quinn as I think a lot of us here in DC are, having gone through the spring with him. And then some of maybe the issues that people see as like these fatal flaws, it's like, oh no, I think that they have potential solutions. So as you go through that same process with the Giants and you hear them ranked 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, 32nd, and all these rankings, do you agree with that? They're like, I just don't think they'll be able to overcome it. Or you're like, no, everyone's missing the point here. The Giants have a chance to surprise people.
Look, I do think the Giants have a chance to surprise people. By the way, I think the Commanders have a chance to surprise people as well. But I also don't blame people that go through rankings. What frustrates me more than anything, and this may shock you because I could laugh up a good time. I'm very good on like revision and then looking forward. A year ago, did anybody think the Green Bay Packers with Jordan Love were going to be a playoff team? Everybody pointed to a million problems, Aaron Rodgers leaving, et cetera, et cetera. And we could find cases like this in the NFL every single season. Geez, we all thought the Jaguars were going to run away in the South. So that's an NFL thing in general. But the Giants, first of all, the Giants talent-wise, I know there's a lot of people that are going to be very unknown. Joe Schoen's turned over a lot of the roster. They have more talent 1 through 53 than they did 2 years ago when they were good enough to win 9 games. Last year, with 3 quarterbacks playing, they won 6 games, and I can give you 3-4 games off the top of my head that came down to basically one play. That's the story of the NFL, though. Everybody lives between 6 and 9 wins. And when you throw in the fact that there's a 7th playoff team in each conference, yeah, I think the Giants, by the way, I know this isn't about Washington, I think both these teams can absolutely surprise and make the playoffs. And I think that everybody looks at these position rankings, and it does make me scratch my head. The Giants just had a Malik Neighbors 6th overall, who, if he went anywhere else but the Giants, people would be drooling about hooking up with other quarterbacks. It's like the idea that, who's going to throw Malik Neighbors the ball? I know that this is hard for people to remember, but Daniel Jones did make the playoffs 2 years ago. So if he was healthy, that is possible. Defensively, though, I think that's where the Giants are going to surprise, man. Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence up front. A great inside linebacker duo with Bobby Okereke, who should have been a Pro Bowler last year, along with Micah McFadden. And a secondary where Tay Banks out of Maryland down there, he emerged last year as a first round pick, and he's going to be the number 1 corner, and they're pretty deep with a lot of good young talent. I think the Giants are going to have a top half of the league defense, and it's very curious if the offensive line guys they've added in free agency, John Runyon Jr., et cetera, gel enough. But I think the Giants are going to be right in the middle there where people think 28th, 29th. This is not a 4-win type football team. I think that would be a catastrophic disaster if it was. I think they're going to be sitting there right there in the hunt graphic come the first week of December in the wild card, because most teams are anyway, and that's where they're going to live.
Yeah, no, I think the Giants and Commanders are both pretty fascinating in mirrored ways that you talked about. Like, these two teams have pretty good front sevens. I think the Giants might overall be better because I think their D-line has more across the board.
Craig, think about that. Burns, Thibodeau, and Dexter Lawrence getting after you. I know Washington's good D-line. That is pretty damn up there.
No, I think in a league full of stacked D-lines, like we did our positional group rankings on Take Command, and I think we put the Giants D-line first. And the Eagles D-line is nasty. The Commanders have 2 Pro Bowlers in the middle, and Dallas has Micah freaking Parsons. And I think we put the Giants first. And like you said, their linebacker core, I think I'd probably slightly take Washington's over, but like they might also be 2 of the best 5 in the league. And I think there's real questions for both secondaries. Obviously, offensively there's a wild outcome of possibilities, but that, said, like this is the NFL. Like that's kind of I can look at almost every team in the league and make an argument for how it could all go wrong with 1 or 2 injuries, and also how if they stay healthy and a couple guys develop, then they could be messing around for a playoff spot.
Of course, and nobody's calling it a Super Bowl team. I'm not calling the Giants an NFC championship team, but I'm sorry if the head coach and a better roster than they had 2 years ago that won 9 games and made the playoffs, if I'm not counting them out in July.
Yeah, which is the beauty of the NFL and why it is king and why we spend most of our time talking about it. Shaun Morash, every day in the afternoons, producing that fine radio program up on WFAN in New York. You can also catch him weekends. He's on doing the national stuff. Basically, you just download the Odyssey app and flip it on, and somewhere in there, Shaun's talking about stuff.
Yeah, and one more plug. If you are interested in Hard Knocks, watching it every week, my podcast, One Giant Step, free on the Odyssey app. I'm going to be doing recap episodes after every single episode of Hard Knocks, treating it like some of the best TV reaction podcasts you have, as opposed to a football reaction podcast.
Love it.
That's why we're doing this for the month.
How's my guy Bryce doing? Is the kid hanging in there?
Bryce is good, man. Bryce, I can't believe I'm saying this as I'm, approaching my late 30s. Bryce has become my voice of the young Giant fan on the podcast. So Bryce is great. Bryce is great.
Yeah, another fine Syracuse alum. We're everywhere. You can't escape.
Yeah.
DA left, Shaun, but you replaced him with another orange.
Craig, and I could always tell when somebody I'm working with is from Syracuse. You know how? They tell you.
It's fair enough. As me and my producer sit here as two Syracuse alums having this conversation with you. Shaun, always appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
All right, take care, Craig.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.